Today, what we have is the Bank of England moving over to ISO 20022. We've also got the Financial Stability Board updated timeline with extra clarity on all things regulation and cross-border payments. We've also got a potential flip the switch moment. At least that terminology or similar terminology is being used in documentation. I'm going to explore that a little bit. We're also going to get into this whole BRICS token, this whole idea that the BRICS will have their own gold-backed currency that they'll operate trade within. And then I've also received an email from His Majesty's Treasury in relation to the Financial Services and Markets Bill that we covered last week. So if you're not already aware, the Bank of England is currently on this whole RTGS implementation thing. RTGS meaning real-time gross settlement. Now, typically in videos that I've mentioned spanning the last whole year or so, I've said whenever you hear RTGS, think Ripple and XRP, because XRP is a settlement asset. And if you're trying to do that in real time, a 3 to 5 second kind of delay for settlement like XRP can provide, there's a lot that goes into that process. And so the Bank of England are slowly rolling out this whole RTGS, think XRP payment system. Now, I might be getting overly bullish about that XRP thing, but hear me out, and this is why I say XRP. When you narrow it down, let's look at a few things. If we completely believe that blockchain technology is the future, and we have multiple sources, I mean, it's endless to say that distributed ledger technology and blockchain are where the future financial system is going, you then just have to go a few layers deeper. Okay, well, there's multiple elements to that ecosystem. There's smart contracts through XDC. There's Internet of Things through IOTA. And you've also got payments. And really, there's only two assets that work within payments, and those are XRP and XLM. Then when you look at the distinction between what happens in the retail environment, that is me and you as people, versus what happens in the institutional environment, which is the wholesale environment, those two assets that are right there, XRP and XLM, get divided, right? You've got institutional grade payments with XRP, and you've got retail type payments with XLM. So you've narrowed it down all the way, and RTGS being real-time gross settlement. So in payments, we're talking about payments and super quick payments. We're also talking about institutional quick payments. That's why it narrows down to XRP. And I think a lot of the time, and I was guilty of this kind of last year in November, kind of putting so much emphasis on this ISO 20022 thing as like, this is the big launch. But really what happened on November the 21st last year was the start. It was the start of that ISO rollout. And so I want to read this little excerpt from the Payments Journal here. It says, the Bank of England's successful migration to the ISO 20022 reveals a significant achievement within its multi-year scheme to renew its real-time gross settlement services, RTGS. The objectives of the scheme include improving resilience, innovation, as well as competition within the current payment landscape. And it really emphasizes this is the beginning of the rollout of the transition to the new system. It's not necessarily happening on a specific date. There's so much that goes into it, which we'll get into a little bit later. We can also see a statement made by Victoria Cleland, who we talked about last week as well. She's the Executive Director of Payments at the Bank of England. And she said, the introduction of ISO 20022 financial messaging standards marks a major milestone in our mission to enhance our RTGS and CHAP services. Critical infrastructure at the heart of the financial system. Critical infrastructure. This is underneath it all, how it's all going to actually work from a technical standpoint. That's what they're working on. And it's just little headlines here and there where they say, ISO is now part of this new RTGS system. Yeah, but there was so much underneath that. And I think that's what started on November the 21st last year. We completely underestimated the undertaking required to put ISO into play. She also said, in an increasingly globalized payments world, harmonization of messaging through ISO 20022 will enable more systems to speak the same language and ultimately enhance cross-border payments. Enhance cross-border payments. What do we know can enhance cross-border payments? I mean, they're telling us without telling us. But there's something they keep talking about here. It meets our commitments to the Financial Stability Board's roadmap to enhance cross-border payments. And I keep seeing this word roadmap everywhere because I've dug into lots of roadmaps and they're all kind of pointing to one place. And let's get into another little article here. And this is on ffnews.com. It says the move to ISO 20022 is a key element in the bank's RTGS renewal program and meets one of the commitments to the Financial Stability Board's roadmap to enhance cross-border payments. And if you remember my video a couple of days ago, we were digging into that roadmap of cross-border payments and basically saying there's very little to do for the cross-border payments specifically part, and saying it was very left-heavy. All the things that we'd done on the timeline had already been done. There was very little to do. And a final thing to talk about why ISO is so important. Let's look at why, if it didn't exist, if it wasn't adopted, what would keep happening? If organizations lack an ISO 20022 native payment system, and let me remind you that the XRPL is ISO 20022 compliant, like it's made for that stuff. So let me start again and listen to it with those new ears. If organizations lack an ISO 20022 native payment system, a ledger, banks will be required to have a translation layer in between the payment system and the market scheme. The solution is slower, and banks risk losing data by using this process. With the loss of data also comes the loss of insights that the new system brings to the table. So they simply cannot keep going with the old standards. The ISO standard, using an ISO native payment system, they're saying it, why don't they just say it? I know why, but otherwise it would be so inefficient. There'd be a layer in between that kind of has to slow everything down in order to translate the messages. And so I sent this on the Discord. Thank you very, very much for sending this through. We talked about a roadmap last week about how cross-border payments are going to be rolled out by the Financial Stability Board. And another document was brought forward, and this is the G20 roadmap. So this is a G20 roadmap versus the Financial Stability Board roadmap, but they are going in accordance with each other. I wanted to look what was happening with the ISO 20022, elements of that, and we can see very clearly here that July 2024, we should be all wrapped up with everything ISO 20022 in relation to the building block that is titled Finalizing the ISO 20022 Harmonization Requirements and Promoting Their Real-World Implementation. So by July 2024, the real-world implementation element of it, telling everyone that they need to be doing this and telling them why this is so important for your business, will end in July 2024. Then you tie that slightly lower with the idea of improving API harmonization for cross-border payment use. And APIs are how two different pieces of code interact with each other. Imagine the API as like a bridge where the message is translated, or the two systems they come together, right? It's like that. And actually this harmonization between APIs ends in December 2024. And this goes perfectly back to that video last week. The timelines all match up. It seems like by the end of 2025, we're all good to go for basically everything cross-border, ISO, and all of that good stuff. Now, is that the moment where the price starts appreciating for the technology that lies underneath? Who knows, right? I don't know. We're going to get into a little bit later on where people start talking about like flip the switch type language, which makes me think there could be a moment like that now. Let's look at their refreshed timeline and how things look here. I prefer this significantly less than the other timeline. So all the way to the right on these diagrams is the end of Q4 2025. We can see everything ends right there. But what's interesting about this is that it's going a little bit more granular with what I went into last time. This is even more in the weeds. And so what we can now see is that by the end of, basically from where we are today to the end of 2024 is jam-packed with absolutely everything required to get this G20 roadmap for cross-border payments complete. And so which one of these moments, is it Project Nexus at phase 3 coming to its conclusion? Is that what takes the price of the underlying assets, the neutral bridge asset underneath? Is that what takes it to these new heights? So many of these things, it's better just to say, let's look at the end of 2025 for all these things to be done. But in the meantime, the starting of different initiatives and the ending of different initiatives, we're going to provide so many different reports and insights into what's happening underneath the rug. Interesting though, this would be another thing to keep an eye on, is that on task 8A, this is called Develop Harmonized Global ISO Requirements for Cross-Border Payments. That is all taking place specifically at the beginning of Q4 this year. So the actual requirements in full, in detail, black and white, be at the start of Q4 this year. We always talk about the flip the switch moment. This is where technology all aligns and it all gets turned on at a specific moment. That time where it turns on, the underlying assets that are actually settling the value on the blockchain, we believe that to be XRP, or at least on the XRP ledger. Once all of that value starts going through that system. That is a flip the switch moment. And if you wanted to calculate the price of the assets, all you would have to know is how much value would go through the system. This is a really difficult thing for us to try and nail down because it's very hard to calculate how much money is in the world, for example. You've also got other players in the ecosystem that will take some share of the market. But look what the Bank of International Settlements have said about improving cross-border payments and why it needs to be a clean slate. CBD systems, through starting with a clean slate, could reduce some of the frictions in cross-border payments through interoperating across borders. However, a CBDC would be no different to a traditional payment system in that broader compatibility requirements like consistent technical standards, oversight frameworks, private and public laws, and requirements for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing would still be necessary for effective interoperability. Yet international collaboration, specifically through the G20 roadmap, that's the G20 roadmap we've just covered in this video, to enhance cross-border payments, is actively working on these issues to improve existing payments and CBDC systems of the future. Almost alluding to the idea that as soon as all of these things are cleared, once we've got AML, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism funding, whatever it said there, it seems like the new slate would begin at the end of this timeline, which is basically the end of 2025 or the start of 2026. That's when the clean slate begins. And you can only start that clean slate, you can only flip the switch when everything in the background is ready for the switch to happen. You can't just switch and then realize you haven't done the AML side of things, right? You can only switch when it's all done. At least that's what that Bank of International Settlements document makes me believe. And that was published in September 2021, and it's called the Central Bank Digital Currencies System Design and Interoperability. Now we're talking about cross-border. We've talked about the Bank of England. We also talk a lot about the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And I found this document from November 2018 that talks about cross-border and interbank payments and settlements. And this document from the Monetary Authority of Singapore breaks down the solutions to cross-border payments in a series of different models. Bear with me. Model 1 is basically like, we don't change anything. We just keep doing what we're doing, and that is what it is. Model 2 is basically increasing what you do within your country with RTGS without using distributed ledger technology or CBDCs. So that's another model. But then we get into models 3A, 3B, and 3C, and these are basically wide open for the adoption of CBDCs and distributed ledger technology. And let's look at what they said here. And it's similar language to what we heard about in that clean slate document earlier. Models 3A, 3B, and 3C are based on the settlement of cross-border payments between banks using tokenized form of central bank liabilities, wholesale CBDCs that can be exchanged between banks through a distributed ledger-enabled platform built to facilitate cross-border payments. By starting afresh, did you hear me? By starting afresh, a clean slate, outside of the constraints of the existing domestic RTGS systems, as opposed to patching over the top as in Model 1, it becomes possible to build features such as 24/7 availability and payment tracking in the central infrastructure. Here's where it gets interesting. The scale of the technical challenge to implement each of these models should not be underestimated. There's so much work that needs to happen in order to flip the switch. When I talked to Ricardo Correa from R3, he talked about this switch, the light bulb moment, right? He said there's so much behind the wall, the wiring, how that wiring navigates through the house, the system, and into a server, into a power. Then you've got the grid that comes into that, and there's a whole infrastructure behind it. There's so much to think about. But the consumer on the other side, or the bank, when they start to use this clean slate, flip of the switch system, they just flick on the light switch. And that's all they see. Very simple. It's just a switch to flip. And I think when they said don't underestimate how much there is to do, when you look at that roadmap, I mean, it's ridiculous. The amount of things that have to happen, the papers that have to be published that are 90, 100, 200, 300 pages long, some of these documents. And there's countless amounts of these documents to produce, and they all have to be done in such a way where a consensus is reached and everything's ready. It's all ready to go. At that moment, which I believe to be the end of 2025, the start of 2026, is when that switch gets flipped. Potentially. Anyway, it's just my speculation. And I was just looking through documents, as I do, and I saw a document from the Monetary Authority of Singapore. If you don't know why that's important, check out my other videos. I'm talking about how Ripple has an in-principle approval from the Monetary Authority of Singapore to be a major payments institute. This is a big deal. So I'm looking through their documents and I see a document from Deloitte. And I'm 27 pages in, and this is what I read. This is going to be a long one, so bear with me. One of Deloitte's most notable prototypes is in the cross-border payments application. In the current payment ecosystem, cross-border payments are marred with expensive and uncertain transaction fees, long processing times, and often opportunity for fraud. With distributed ledger technology, the reliance on some intermediaries, such as correspondent banks and notaries, can be reduced, since every actor on the network can transact directly with one another, which can dramatically accelerate transaction times. In addition, DLT handles the validation, verification, and fulfillment of payments in near real time without the need for costly fees, thus increasing efficiency and driving cost savings. Near real time, because real time would be instant, like right now. Near real time would be 3 to 5 seconds. Anyway, I joke. You're going to get excited now when I read this next bit. Another key consideration is that the identity of the user making the transactions is verified, streamlining the KYC process and leading to greater fraud prevention. The prototype integrates Ripple and Stellar blockchain platforms to enable person-to-person transactions across geographies, cross-border. DLT offers significant benefits to both P2P and business-to-business payments. That's P2P is Stellar, B2B is Ripple. When I think about these things, I talk about Ripple's involvement with Singapore, and we see Project Ubin, just like this, talking so highly and complementary of Ripple and Stellar. And then you see how just this little example here on that Project Ubin report talks about how it shows very easily how customer onboarding, smart identity, cross-border payments, KYC, and all of the below, they all integrate. You can't have a weak link in that chain. Because if you have that weak link and you turn the switch on, you flip the switch, you start that clean slate, you start anew, the whole thing crumbles. So it all needs to be ready in order to flip the switch. And we've also seen in the news recently that BRICS are going to have a currency of sorts that is backed by gold. I've been digging and digging and digging. I can't find for the life of me anything that hints at what platform that's going to be built on. However, the only thing I'm holding on to that I couldn't find on the internet, maybe somebody else can find, was that there was a document a few years ago. May have been longer than a few years ago, but it talked about the head of economy in Russia or something like that, and how he has piloted the Ripple or the XRP ledger for future payment systems. Now, I can't find it. Somebody might be able to find it. I also might have dreamed it or something, but please go out and find it if you can. And I'm just trying to find hints at what kind of system they might be using for this currency. But there's a lot more digging to be done, and I might do this on future videos and get a real deep dive, because if it's going to be backed by gold and it's on a distributed ledger type technology or a blockchain, there will have to be some sort of initiative within the BRICS nations for tokenizing gold. There has to be something in there related to that. And we can find our links, just giving you sight into what's going on in my brain. But we're going to find out in the next kind of 2 months or so what technology BRICS are going to be using for this asset, this token, this coin. I don't know if it might just be physical or whether it might just be blockchain technology. And it's a wide open world of CBDCs, and XRP is not going to take charge of all of these things. It's not going to take the lead on all of the CBDCs. There's going to be specific targeted CBDCs the XRPL CBDC platform will operate with. And I came across this document by Terranet, and they referenced a few important pieces of information here. And one of them is there from James Wallace from Ripple. And this was actually in a Thinking Crypto podcast with Tony Edward. And he said that collaboration with a variety of players is required to achieve a CBDC. It's not just the XRP or Ripple. There's lots of different entities that play into all of this. And he said, so in Europe, there's a Digital Euro Association, which we are also a member of and working with, and also the Digital Pound Foundation in the UK. It's really the private sector trying to encourage the public sector to move a bit more quickly. Then we've got Brooks Entwistle, who's a managing director at Ripple, and he said that the company does not intend to implement a solution for every central bank. but it's taking a targeted approach. We've realized that we're not going to solve that problem for every single central bank around the world. We are very targeted. We found some great interest in some of the smaller central banks around the world that are looking for a strategy or a partner, looking for a technology, a side blockchain, and some ideas how to go about this. Later on, he says this, and this is very exciting. There are places where we can play, maybe with a side chain to the XRP ledger. We may help with the interoperability across this, but it's going to be different for every single central bank. Now, he's hinted at the idea there of it doesn't need different blockchains. It's possible that they can play around here with side chains on the XRP ledger to do this. And it would be interoperable as a result very easily. But ultimately what they're saying is that every central bank is going to have different requirements, different needs, and it might not all be the XRP ledger. And finally, okay, here's the good one. All right, I'm excited about this one. I got an email back from His Majesty's Treasury, the HM Treasury, responding to a question I had when I dug into the Financial Services and Markets Bill. So in my email, I asked them, when do these things actually go into effect? Like sometimes you can get a bill through royal assent and everything that gets signed by the king goes straight into law, effective immediately. But then sometimes the bill proposes exactly when these things need to go into law. And I got a response, and let's read it. Thank you for your correspondence dated 28th of June to HM Treasury regarding the Financial Services and Markets Bill. The Financial Services and Markets Act 2023 received royal assent on the 29th of June 2023. It's customary for there to be a period of 2 months between the passing of an Act of Parliament and its provisions coming into effect. However, the legislation itself can specify alternative timeframes for commencement. They then went on to outline all the different sections within the bill that went live on the 29th and others that will go live in 2 months' time from the royal assent. It says 24, 56, 77, 78, 80 and 87, Part 5 of Schedule 2 and Schedule 10 came into force on the day at which the royal assent was given. But sections 22, 52, 54, 55, 58, 60, 61, 62, 72, and 74 will come into force 2 months after royal assent. So I thought, okay, now we've got to look into all these sections. But I found out very quickly that section 22 right here is the digital settlement assets part, meaning that the digital settlement assets laws or bills will get put into action 2 months after the royal assent. Bringing us to Tuesday, the 29th of August this year is when that goes actually into law in real life. And actually I had a big kind of a forehead slap moment. I actually looked back at the Financial Services and Markets Bill in the documentation, and it says in section 86 titled Commencement, it basically told you that from the beginning. I didn't need to even email the Treasury. And section 22, as you can see right there, is digital settlement assets. We had the answer all along, but it's coming now, okay? And this Financial Services and Markets Bill, the defining of digital settlement assets, is just one part of this massive roadmap that the G20 is putting out, the Financial Stability Board's putting out, and we're just in the midst of all of it. You know, when you look at these timelines, we're right in the middle of all of it. It's all happening. But the end of 2025 seems to be the most important moment, the highest potential moment for a clean slate, starting anew, flipping a switch. If you enjoyed this video, please don't leave without subscribing to the channel. You can also hit like if you like the video. If you want to watch my interviews with experts in the space, click that video right below. The one right above is the algorithm's choice for you to watch of mine. You can also click my face to subscribe right there. Stay tuned with all this crazy news and the documents that I'm reading for you. Stay emotionless, and I'll see you in the next one.